Don't let him eat that. The warning cut through the kitchen too late. The spoon was already inches from Silas Cawthorn's lips. For 9 days, the billionaire's son had refused everything: bottles, formula, soft food, supplements. Money had summoned the best pediatric specialists in Monterey County to this estate. Machines had beeped. Charts had filled. Prognoses had been softened with careful words. But the baby had continued to fade. Now, in the quiet heart of the mansion, the kitchen, not a hospital, LaToya Jenkins, the new maid, stood frozen with a trembling spoon in her hand. She had not been instructed to feed him. No one had given her permission. She had simply acted. Across the room, Everett Cawthorn watched, breath caught in his throat. He had seen this scene fail dozens of times before. Doctors, nurses, specialists, all defeated by a tiny mouth that would not open. But Silas did not turn away this time. He leaned forward. The mansion seemed to stop breathing. 9 days earlier, Everett had still believed this was a medical problem. A stubborn phase, a digestive complication, something money could eventually crush into compliance. He was wrong, because 9 days earlier, Silas had lost the only voice he trusted most in the world. His mother, Clarice Cawthorn, had collapsed under the weight of postpartum trauma so severe that doctors had ordered immediate psychiatric hospitalization in Portland, Oregon. One night, she was there. The next morning, she was gone. No goodbye, no transition, no explanation a baby could understand. From that moment on, Silas stopped eating. Doctors called it refusal to thrive. Everett called it a nightmare, but no one yet called it what it truly was: grief inside a body too small to name it. LaToya did not know any of this when she lifted the spoon. She only knew the sound she had hummed while stirring the porridge was the same tune her own mother once used when hunger was tied to fear instead of food. And for reasons no chart could explain, Silas had responded. Across the kitchen, Everett felt something he had not felt since Clarice was taken away. Hope fragile, terrifying, and completely out of his control. Was this the first step toward healing, or the most dangerous mistake anyone in that kitchen could make? Before we continue, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let's dive back into the story. The Cawthorn estate sat still, far too still for a home where a child lived. Day 9. 9 days since the cries stopped. 9 days since little Silas had eaten. His tiny frame was propped up by ivy lines, a tangle of silent desperation clinging to his wrist like jewelry no child should ever wear. Upstairs, just outside the baby's room, Everett walked the same stretch of hardwood again and again, his bare feet echoing a tired rhythm against polished floors. He hadn't changed out of the black shirt he'd worn 3 days ago. His beard was days past clean cut, and there were sunken shadows beneath his eyes where sleep had long abandoned him. A phone on speaker broke the hush. "We're doing everything we can. Medically, he's stable for now," the doctor said. "Clinical, measured." "What does for now mean?" Everett's voice cracked. A pause, the kind that carried more than words. "We're monitoring organ function closely. But Everett, we must be realistic. His intake is non-existent." Everett hung up before he could hear another euphemism for failure. Stable, monitored, observed. Words that felt like placing a sheet over something still breathing. Downstairs, even the staff whispered. Footsteps were softened. Doors were eased closed. It was as if sound itself might shatter the fragile thread holding the child in that room together. When the doorbell rang, it felt too loud. LaToya stepped into the estate with a canvas tote on her shoulder and a calmness born of experience. Another nanny call. Another high-end family. Another week or two, she assumed, before the permanent help returned. "This way," a staff member whispered, leading her up the curved staircase. They passed expensive paintings and untouched furniture, but no laughter, no music, no signs of life. LaToya was ushered into the baby's room like a nurse walking into an ICU. She expected crying, screaming, maybe, but the silence hit harder. There he was, tiny, unmoving, and wrapped in pristine linens on a cushiony crib mattress. His eyes weren't closed, but they weren't awake either. They stared past the ceiling, past the lights, past her. Latoya froze. She knew this look. Not fussy, not cranky, gone without leaving. She took one small step forward, then another. No one else in the room breathed. She bent down, her voice soft as cotton. "Hey, little man." And for just a second, barely a blink, his eyes shifted to her. It wasn't much, but it was something. A flutter where there had been only stillness. Latoya's breath caught in her throat. She knelt slowly, like one wrong move might send his spirit floating further away. "Sometimes the body stops eating," she whispered. "When the heart no longer believes it is safe." No one spoke. Even the house held its breath. Everett stood outside the door, listening. And though he didn't fully hear the words, something in the air had changed. Was it hope, or just movement? The difference, in that moment, didn't matter, because someone finally had reached him. Some stories hurt to watch because they look like rooms we once stood in watching someone fade and not knowing what to do. Staying with this one is a small way of saying those moments mattered, even if no one saw them. Why hasn't a medically stable baby eaten for more than a week? The answer may be buried in silence, or in the soul that first broke it. The estate was silent again, an exhausted, haunted kind of silence. Somewhere beyond the bedroom hallway, the distant hum of the ocean whispered against the cliffs of Carmel by the sea. But inside Everett's private office, time stood still. A lamp glowed dimly across a desk covered in unsigned documents, contracts, memos, urgent agreements waiting for a signature that wouldn't come. Everett sat hunched, elbows pressed into his knees, staring at nothing. His pen lay untouched. His hands trembled slightly. He'd been here for hours. Behind him, the fireplace cast flickers of light onto the wood-paneled walls, dancing shadows that looked like ghosts reaching. His eyes shifted to the side drawer. Slowly, he opened it. Inside, a single flash drive. He plugged it in. The screen blinked once, then opened a grainy video file. There she was, Clarice, hair tucked back in a loose bun, face pale but smiling. She held Silas against her chest, her voice light as a lullaby. "See, baby, that's the ocean. Just for you." She kissed the top of his head. He squealed softly. Everett lasted 6 seconds before slamming the laptop shut. Breath hitched, like he'd been punched in the lungs, because he remembered everything that came next. Clarice, after childbirth, was not the woman in the video. She didn't cry. She panicked. She would stare out windows for hours, whispering, "Something's wrong. I know something's wrong." She kept doors locked, curtains drawn, lights on all night. She wouldn't sleep, couldn't. She'd hold Silas so tightly the nurses had to gently peel her fingers away. She'd mutter things that didn't make sense about voices in the wallpaper, shadows moving when no one else saw. She scratched at her skin, refused to eat, refused to rest. "I'm slipping," she whispered to Everett once, barely audible. "I feel like I'm slipping out of my own mind." He tried to help, tried to be patient. But love was no match for the storm inside her. A psychiatrist was brought in. Words like postpartum psychosis filled the room. Emergency inpatient care was the only option. Portland. A specialist clinic. Everett signed the consent forms with shaking hands. They took her that night. No goodbyes. Just a silent hallway, a nurse with calm eyes, and a sleeping baby who would never again hear the sound of her voice. Clarice vanished, but not into the ground, into a place where the people you love can't follow. Back in the present, Everett wiped at his face, angry at the tears that always came too easily now. He opened a drawer, pulled out a cloth rabbit toy one Clarice had picked out before Silas was born, and pressed it to his chest. She didn't die, but she was gone all the same. And Silas was just old enough to remember the warmth, but not old enough to understand why it vanished. Not every disappearance is a death, Everett whispered to no one, but some absences starve the living just the same. He looked toward the hallway, where the faintest light flickered under Silas's door, and he wondered what happened inside that child the night his mother was taken away. The morning light filtered through pale curtains, casting a dull glow over the nursery that once held laughter and lullabies. Now, it held tension. Silas lay motionless in the crib, his arms resting limply by his sides, lips dry, cheeks sunken just enough to make Everett's chest ache every time he looked at him. A soft knock broke the silence. The pediatric specialist had arrived. He was kind-eyed, gentle-voiced, and expensive. Everett had flown him in privately, another name in the growing list of experts, who walked in with confidence and walked out with pity. The doctor washed his hands, then stepped into the nursery like it was holy ground. "I'll be gentle," he said quietly, kneeling beside the crib. Different bottles were prepared, some warm, some cold. Hypoallergenic formulas, organic blends, spoon-fed purees. One by one, they were brought to Silas's lips. One by one, he turned his head away. No crying, no fussing, just refusal. The doctor's smile faltered. He adjusted the incline of the crib, shifted the lighting, even played a soft sound recording of a heartbeat from a nearby speaker. Nothing. Silas blinked slowly. Disconnected. The doctor checked vitals, listened to the heartbeat, measured pupil response. "He's present, but only in the physical sense," the doctor murmured. Everett stood by the window, arms crossed, watching every attempt like his will alone could force success. "How bad is it?" he asked. The doctor stood, rubbing the back of his neck. "Physically, he's deteriorating. Organ stress is beginning. His body's conserving energy where it can. If this continues, we'll face real failure in a matter of days." Everett clenched his jaw. "Then try something else. There must be an alternative feeding method. An infusion. We've tried everything the body will accept," the doctor interrupted gently. "But this isn't a digestive issue." Everett's eyes narrowed. "Then what is it?" The doctor paused. His tone shifted. "In some cases," he said carefully, "when trauma isn't addressed, when a child experiences loss or confusion or fear they can't express, it manifests physically. They stop accepting what the body needs. Not because they can't, but because, somewhere inside, they no longer believe it matters." Everett scoffed, stepping back. "So now, we're blaming feelings?" "I'm not blaming anything," the doctor replied calmly. "But science can measure blood and bone, not the moment a heart decides it's alone." There it was, that intangible territory Everett had no tools for. Emotional causes, spiritual injuries, wounds that no machine could scan. Later, in the hallway, the doctor pulled Everett aside, lowering his voice. "His body is fighting," he said, "but I'm not sure it's food he's waiting for." Everett stood frozen, jaw clenched, the words digging beneath his skin like thorns. So many specialists, so much medicine, and still, his son wasted away in front of him. Unreachable. He wanted someone to blame. A name. A condition. A chemical imbalance. Not silence. Not grief. Not some invisible wound no one could fix. And yet, Silas remained unchanged, wrapped in blankets, eyes wide open, soul half closed. If food and medicine can't reach him, what can? It was late. The estate had gone quiet again, swallowed by the stillness that arrived after long, heavy days. Most of the staff had retreated to their quarters, the hall lights dimmed, and the upstairs monitor blinked silently on the kitchen counter. LaToya stood alone in the service kitchen, her hands moving without hurry. She wasn't cooking for anyone else tonight, just herself. Just enough. From a small pot on the stove, the scent of warm rice porridge drifted upward, mild and comforting. It was a simple recipe, just rice, water, and a pinch of salt. Her grandmother used to make it when the house felt too heavy to bear. No spices, no noise, just warmth. She stirred gently, her wooden spoon tapping the side of the pot. Behind her, the baby monitor crackled faintly. Then a sound, weak, faint, but unmistakable. A fussy whimper. LaToya froze, one hand gripping the spoon. It wasn't a full cry, not even a protest, just a thread of sound, like a breeze rustling through brittle paper. She didn't think, she didn't plan, she just moved, taking the bowl from the stove and grabbing a clean spoon. She made her way to the dining corner of the kitchen, the exact spot with the built-in baby seat, nestled between cabinetry and soft lighting. She eased Silas into the seat, his limbs floppy, his eyes cloudy but not gone. They followed her now, slowly, but they followed. She moved carefully, her steps soft, her breath calm. As she sat beside him, she began to hum low, slow, and steady. She didn't notice at first, but the tune, the rhythm, it matched the melody Clarice once sang on quiet afternoons, the one captured in that old video. Everett couldn't bear to watch. Silas blinked. His fingers curled just slightly. His glassy stare didn't shift away. She raised the spoon, letting the steam roll upward like a whisper between them. "Just one try, baby," Latoya said, her voice almost inaudible. Just one. The kitchen didn't breathe. Neither did she. The spoon hovered. Then, slowly, almost mechanically, Silas's lips parted. Just a little. Just enough. Latoya's heart clenched as she brought the spoon forward. For the first time in 9 days, food passed between his lips. A single swallow. Small. Imperfect. Holy. She watched, terrified to move too fast. Terrified it would all slip away. But it didn't, because something had cracked open. Not in his throat. In the space between them. The body remembered, she whispered. What the mind had been forced to forget. Warmth. Safety. Rhythm. A song. A woman who didn't flinch. A kitchen that smelled like comfort. A spoon that didn't demand but invited. Everything inside Silas was still fragile, still unraveling. But something had reached him. Some moments look small from the outside. A spoon, a song, a kitchen corner. But anyone who's waited for a sign of life knows these seconds feel like eternity. If you've ever watched for that first little response, you already understand why this story shouldn't be walked away from lightly. Will his body accept it? Or reject it, like every attempt before? The spoon was still in Latoya's hand. She hadn't moved. Silas had swallowed. She'd watched the motion with the stillness of someone waiting to see if lightning had actually struck, or if she'd imagined the flash. 10 seconds passed, then 20, then 30. No gagging, no whimpering, no rejection, just the quiet sound of breath. And then, slowly, like a leaf drifting on wind, Silas's tiny hand reached forward. Clumsy, weak, but deliberate. It grazed the spoon. Latoya gasped softly, the sound catching in her throat like it didn't know if it should be joy or fear. He wasn't just accepting the food. He wanted it. And then from somewhere behind her, a footstep. Faint. Slow. Everett stood at the edge of the kitchen. He hadn't meant to come down. He'd only wandered toward the faint humming, barely aware of where he was going. But now he stood frozen in the doorway, unable to move or speak. Before him was a scene that didn't belong to the last 9 days. Silas, sitting upright in the baby seat at the dining corner, the corner where everything had felt so empty just days before. Eyes open, mouth parted slightly, waiting. Latoya knelt beside him, spoon in hand, face streaked with silent tears. Her eyes met Everett's, and in them, there was no pride, no smugness, only fear that she'd crossed a line she hadn't meant to. She didn't speak. She didn't need to, because Everett had no words. His lips parted once, then closed. No commands, no questions, nothing. He looked at his son, and his son looked back, not through him, not past him, at him, alert, present, alive. Latoya lifted the spoon again. Everett's breath caught in his chest. Another mouthful. Another swallow. Still no gag, no flinch. Just a quiet, aching hunger that hadn't spoken in days, now whispering itself back into being. Miracles rarely arrive with trumpets, Latoya said softly, not even sure why the words left her mouth. Most of them enter through the kitchen door. Everett didn't blink. He felt the weight of it all, the silence, the effort, the exhaustion collapse in on itself like a wave finally crashing. He looked at the spoon, the baby, the woman on her knees, and for the first time since Clarice vanished, he didn't know what to do. This moment, this simple, quiet miracle had come without his planning, without his authority, without his control. And sometimes, the most holy things don't need your permission to arrive. Will Everett see this as a breakthrough, or a threat to his control? The wind off the coast was sharp that night, cold enough to bite through Everett's sleeves. But he didn't move. He stood barefoot on the balcony outside his private quarters, eyes fixed on the dark horizon where the ocean met the sky. The waves below smashed against the cliffs, relentless and loud, but in his mind, there was only one sound. The doctor's voice. It's his bond. Those 3 words had echoed all day. Not his nutrition, not his metabolism, his bond. Everett gripped the balcony rail until his knuckles whitened. He closed his eyes, and Clarice came rushing back. Not the version on camera, smiling softly as she held Silas, but the one he'd tried not to remember. The one in the hospital gown. The one who shook with fear she couldn't explain. The one who looked at him and whispered that she was slipping away. The memory burned. He saw himself at that desk, signing the intake paperwork, hands steady, voice calm. It's the right thing, he'd told himself. She's not safe. She'll get better. He won't remember. But he had remembered. Everett turned his eyes upward, toward the stars that flickered indifferently above the sea. His voice came out hoarse, barely audible over the wind. He started refusing food the same week she left. He said it like a confession, like a wound, like a prayer no one would answer. The guilt pressed in heavier than the estate, heavier than the decisions, heavier than the silence that had filled his son's room every night since. I took away his mother, Everett whispered, and tried to replace her with schedules, with checklists, with the best help money could buy. His voice cracked. He leaned over the rail, forehead resting on cold metal, as the first tear fell. Then another, and another. No one saw. No one would know. But the man who hadn't broken during 9 days of watching his child wither, broke now, not from helplessness, but from truth. Some men don't break when life hits them. They break when truth finally does. He hadn't fed his son's heart. He'd treated Silas like a system to repair, not a soul to reach. And somehow, a quiet maid with a wooden spoon had found a way past every wall he'd built. Everett didn't know what to do with that. Didn't know how to be the man who could. He looked out over the water, the wind stinging his face like judgment. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't try to fix anything. He just let himself feel what it meant to be wrong, to be responsible, to be the reason a child turned away from life. Can a father who chose order over attachment learn how to love differently? The days that followed didn't bring celebration. They brought quiet. And it was in that quiet that healing began to hum. Each morning, LaToya prepared the same warm porridge, just a small bowl right there in the kitchen's dining corner. The same spot, the same rhythm, the same wooden spoon. And each morning, Silas opened his mouth, sometimes eagerly, sometimes slowly, but always willingly. His cheeks began to round out again. His cry, once faint and dry, returned louder, sharper, like a rusty bell learning how to ring again. His eyes, those haunted, distant windows, began to sparkle. Not with joy, not yet, but with presence. He was here. LaToya never rushed, never changed the routine. Just warm porridge, soft humming, and steady hands. The pediatrician returned on day 13. He stared at the charts, checked the vitals 3 times, then turned to Everett, eyebrows raised in disbelief. "Remarkable," he murmured. "Everything's improving. Everything." Everett only nodded, seated quietly in the kitchen chair near the window. He didn't pace, didn't instruct, didn't interrupt. He just watched. Watched LaToya scoop, watched Silas chew, watched life begin to return to a child he'd once tried to fix with protocols and procedures. Everett didn't know how to step in. So, for the first time, he simply didn't. He showed up, that was all. One evening, he asked the staff to set up a scheduled video call. Not a business meeting, not a check-in with a board, a call with Clarice. Her face appeared on the screen, drawn, tired, but clearer than it had been in months. Her eyes scanned the camera, searching. LaToya sat Silas in the baby seat beside the monitor. The little boy blinked at the screen, confused. Then, curious. Then, as Clarice whispered his name again and again, "Silas, Silas, baby, it's Mama." He turned his head. To her, he looked, really looked. Her voice broke. She began to cry softly, rocking slightly in her chair on the other side of the screen. "Hi, my baby. Hi, my sweet boy." Latoya stepped back. Everett stood behind the screen, his hands trembling, unable to speak. Silas didn't say anything, but he looked, he heard, and he stayed. Healing did not arrive as a reward for getting everything right. It came as mercy. Even while so much was still broken, there were still gaps, still therapy sessions, still shadows under Clarice's eyes, still a fragile calm in Silas's body. But something sacred had happened, not fixed, found. Grace didn't wait for permission. It didn't ask who deserved it. It just came, like a soft knock at the kitchen door, and the only thing anyone had to do was open their hands and receive it. What kind of life can they build now that the crisis has passed, but the scars are still there? The spoon no longer trembled. It moved with ease, now dipping into warm porridge, lifting to a small, waiting mouth, greeted by an eager smile. Weeks had passed, and in the kitchen corner that once held 9 long days of fear, Silas now ate without hesitation. No coaxing, no tears, just breakfast in a patch of morning light where love had learned to return. Latoya sat beside him, humming softly as she wiped his chin. She wasn't the maid anymore. She was the one who stayed, the one who heard what no monitor could catch, the one who saw the hunger before it was about food. And now, she had a title, a new role. Not out of obligation, but out of honor. Caregiver, anchor, presence. Everett had offered it quietly, without ceremony, just a folded contract, and a hand that shook when he passed it across the kitchen table. In Portland, Clarice stood on a quiet balcony, her fingers wrapped around a paper cup of weak coffee. The air was cool, sharp, real. She didn't ask the nurses for updates anymore. Instead, she waited for the daily video. Today's was only 15 seconds long, Silas laughing full and free over a dropped spoon. She watched it 5 times. She didn't cry as much these days, but when she whispered his name, Silas, her voice still cracked. Because some wounds heal slower than others, and some parts of the mind take their time coming home. But she was coming home, piece by piece, and her baby would remember the sound of her voice when she did. Everett had changed, too. Not all at once, but like the house quietly, he had restructured 2 companies, sold off another, fired half the boardroom, and filled the estate with less staff. More life. There were toys in the living room now. Music in the background, nothing grand, just soft jazz or lullabies. He'd kept Clarice's old garden schedule pinned on the fridge, even though no one had touched the soil in months. And in the evenings, he sat on the kitchen floor beside Silas, watching him eat fruit with both fists and laughing when he smeared banana across his cheeks. There were still moments late at night when Everett returned to the memory of that night in Portland. The pen, the papers, the quiet ride back from the hospital with an infant in the car seat and no mother beside him. The guilt hadn't left, but it no longer ruled him. He let it teach him instead. He let it slow him down. He spent more time in the kitchen now than in any boardroom, because this was where it had begun, and this was where it had been saved. God restored the child, but left the scars that taught the father how to love. Some endings aren't neat, they're just honest. If this story touched a place in you that still remembers watching someone fight to stay, staying close to stories like this isn't about entertainment. It's about not letting those battles be forgotten. Not every miracle restores what was lost. Some only teach us how to love what remains.